going?
Yes, I think so.
Perfect. Okay. So, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We're very excited for this lecture. I'd like to introduce Terry Levine, President of the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society, to kick us off with an introduction.
Thanks, Tegan. Welcome, everybody. This is quite an occasion for us. I think it's the first time we've had so many different locations represented, and we're thrilled that you could all be here. I want to welcome you to the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society's first presentation of 2025. I'm really thrilled to know that so many of you have made the effort to join us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Terry Levine, and I'm the president of the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society. I've also been a resident of Ottawa for a long time. I took a small hiatus and moved to New Brunswick, but I was born here and raised here and have come back. So Ottawa is home. For those of you who know people who may not have been able to make themselves available tonight, we will be recording tonight's presentation on Facebook and YouTube, and it will be available in a couple of days so that people can watch it. I want to extend a very warm welcome to our friends from the North who are joining us for the first time. We are delighted by your participation. I want to add that if in the future you want to be included in any of our online programming when you have the opportunity, please contact Tegan and we will endeavor to make it happen for you. Tegan will advise you on the details. As far as I'm concerned, the more, the merrier. Now, to the business at hand. Rick Karp was born in Ottawa and grew up with a whole lot of Jewish kids who always seemed to be at the old Ottawa JCC. Everybody knew everybody else. It was kind of the golden age for kids in the Ottawa Jewish community. But Rick went on to study at Carleton for his undergraduate work. He then moved to Kingston, Ontario and Queen's University for his education degree. Before going to Whitehorse, Rick taught high school in Picton for almost 14 years. During his teaching career, he returned to Queen's again to study for his master's in education. In 1998, Rick rolled up his sleeves and worked with the Jewish community in Whitehorse to find, restore, and rededicate the Jewish community in Dawson City. That was created way back in 1902. Rick is currently the president of the Jewish Cultural Society of the Yukon. He has written 4 books, one of which was sold to CBC TV for the movie rights and has been made into a film. 2 of his books have been published, and a third, as a biography of his wife, Joy, was published last year in October of 2024. He is now beginning work on yet another book to be published later this year about the Jewish presence in the Yukon before, during, and after the Klondike Gold Rush. Let me just say one thing. Living in a small Jewish community in Canada can be difficult. Without the beliefs and effort of individuals like Rick Karp, not many things would happen. It takes one person with a crazy idea who can inspire and motivate others to make it happen. Rick has been that catalyst. Rick has 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren who live in Vancouver, BC. It gives me great pleasure to introduce this evening's guest speaker, Rick Karp.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. Appreciate that.
It's all true.
It's quite a story about the Jewish cemetery in Dawson City. So let me get started with the introduction and how it all began. And then we'll have someone else come in and talk about, actually, we have published the book now, The Jewish Presence Before, During, and After the Klondike Gold Rush. And someone else will come and talk about that. And then we'll finish up with someone talking about our website. We've done a lot of stuff in the last 30 or so years. So let's start from the beginning. It was almost 30 years ago that I was sitting in my office in Whitehorse, and a person by the name of Dr. Norman Kagan from St. Paul, Minneapolis, of all places, came to see me. And this was in late August of 1995. And I was wondering, my goodness, a doctor from St. Paul. But he came into my office and he sat down and he was telling me a story about a member of his congregation whose grandfather, he said, was in the gold rush. And he said that's 1897 to 1905-ish. And he said that this person mentioned that there was a cemetery in Dawson. And that's why Norm Kagan had come. He was just coming back from Dawson and he was looking for the cemetery and he couldn't find it. And so he said he was going to go back to St. Paul. They were going to do more research. And then the congregation in St. Paul was going to come up, find the cemetery, clean it, and claim it for themselves. I didn't know at the time that there was a cemetery in Dawson, although I had heard rumors from people who had been in that area. And I said, oh, so I gave him my business card and I said, well, Dr. Kagan, if we can be of any assistance, let us know. And he left. And then I sat there and I said, wait a minute. If there's a cemetery in our backyard, there's no way that someone a few thousand miles away is going to find it and claim it for themselves. And so I made a few phone calls. Three of us, Arthur Mitchell, Howard Kushner, and myself, in early 1996, we went to Dawson and we looked for the cemetery. We had done some research during the winter, and we knew that if we went up the road, it was a dirt road going halfway up a mountain, and to Cemetery Hill, or the area where they had all the cemeteries. And they had told us that when you get to the RCMP cemetery, stop, park your car, and then look across the street diagonally. That's where the Jewish cemetery is. And we thought, oh, well, that must be easy to find. Why couldn't Norm Kagan find it? So we went across and we looked, and it was all forest. And we were working our way through and we were going deeper and deeper and we couldn't find anything. And we kept on going. We were probably, God, it seemed like forever. But we were just probably 400 or 500 feet in. And then all of a sudden, we noticed that Howard had tripped and fallen. And so we were very concerned. Arthur and I, we were in different parts. And we came together and ran over to Howard and we helped him get up. And he looked at us and he pointed down. And we looked down and there it was, Beit Chaim. It was the archway into the cemetery that he had tripped over. And we were so excited. So we went in and we looked around. It was just all trees and bush and shrubs and everything. But when we searched through, we found one gravestone. Solomon Packer's headstone was there. And so we said, okay, well, we found it. Now we have to do something. We have to get a pathway in. So we went home and got some equipment, chainsaws and stuff. And we came back a week or so later and we made a path in and we cleared away some trees and brush. And And the city of Dawson was very supportive, and we brought it to the road, and they actually collected it and took it away. And so we had an area where we knew where the cemetery was. And that was basically getting into 1997. So at that time, in 1997, we hired a graduate student in history, Owen McEwen, to come up and to actually finish clearing it. And then with several other people, a lot of other people that helped out, we found out the border of the cemetery. We had donated the archway, Beit Chaim, to the Dawson City Museum, and the picket fence that was all around, they started to rebuild the picket fence, only with brand new materials, of course. And so in 1997 and early into 1998, they had restored the cemetery. We had a very special new archway, metal archway, Beit Chaim made, and lots of other things happened. Then in August of 1998, on the 100th anniversary of the gold rush, we had a rededication ceremony. People came to Whitehorse from all over the country. It was absolutely amazing. We were so excited. And one of the key people who came up at the time was the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, the Honorable Herb Gray. And he came up to Whitehorse and joined us for the rededication. But something even more interesting happened at that time. For the first time, as far as we know, the first time in history, we had a Torah in Whitehorse. And Rebbitzin Joan Cohen led the Shabbat services on Friday night in a local hotel. We don't have a shul here. We don't even have a minyan here. But because so many people came up, we had a minyan, and we had booked a local hotel to do Friday night services and candle lighting. And there are pictures of that in the book and pictures of Herb Cohen speaking at the rededication. So we were really, Herb Gray, I'm sorry, we were really excited about that. So here we were, late August 1998, in Whitehorse. We did the services Friday night and Shabbat services on Saturday. And then we went up to Dawson on Sunday for the rededication. Now, there's a couple of interesting points here. I think, again, for the first time in history, to bring the Rebbitzin up with the Torah, I had to buy a seat beside her on the plane. So she was sitting here and the Torah was sitting beside her on the plane. And when the plane arrived in Whitehorse, the RCMP were there in their formal red serge. There were two of them in their formal red serge. Everyone got off the plane except for the Rebbitzin and the Torah. And these two RCMP officers in their red serge went on the plane, got the Torah, brought it off, and presented it to us. And it was really quite an event. And there was in the lobby of the airport, there was quite a crowd watching all of this happen. And another thing, the RCMP had agreed that they were going to protect the Torah. So they took it to the RCMP offices. And then when we needed it Friday night, Friday night afternoon, they brought it to the hotel. When that was finished, they brought it back to the RCMP offices, and then they brought it over again on Saturday. So I don't know if the RCMP have ever done that before anywhere. So it'd be interesting to hear if there are any other stories of that. Now, it's very important, because we promised we would do this, to give credit to the Yukon government, because they gave us the funding for the cleanup, for the restoration, for the rededication of the cemetery. So we thank the Yukon government for doing that. And then, after all was said and done, and the rededication, and everyone left and went home, we figured, oh, okay, well, we're finished. The Dawson City administration had agreed to look after the cemetery for at least a few years. They were going to look after it, and they did, which was really wonderful. And this history student that I mentioned earlier, Owen McEwen, he had done some research trying to find out who was buried in the cemetery because there was only one gravestone. But we did notice on each side of the gravestone that there were mounds, but we didn't know who was in there. So Owen did a study of that, and he left his research paper with us. And that was it. We thought, okay, well, we found a cemetery. That's great. So a few years passed by. And then Dr. Brent Slobodin, who was a friend and an historian, who had just retired from his position in the Department of Education, came on the scene. And after reading Owen's research paper, studying the 1902 census, which was the only census that we saw at that time, the 1902 census, studying that and identifying many Jewish people in Dawson during the gold rush, he wanted to complete more research. He did a lot of work, found some unbelievable stories, and created these 3 panels that you see behind me. And as well, he created this booklet. And in the booklet, there are pictures of the rededication. There are pictures. This is I'm not sure if you can see, here's Herb Gray at the cemetery. And you can see down here the new picket fence. And this is the Rebbitzin doing some rededication at the cemetery. Really quite an experience for all of us. With Brent Slobodin, we hired Brent to do this research, to create the booklet, to create the panels. And again, for the second time, it was the Yukon government that gave us the funding to do that. And these 3 panels and the booklet traveled the country, traveled all over Canada, and people got to see that. And so we were really, really pleased with what was going on. And there are some amazing stories in these panels getting to the gold rush. Over here, it was the Schwarzbacher Hardware Company in Seattle, the Jewish company in Seattle that had a ship. And in 1997, there was a ship that came from Yukon to Seattle with over a ton of gold on it. And that's what stimulated the gold rush. It was really, really fascinating. And so getting to the gold rush, there's all sorts of information on this first panel. And it's fascinating. There's a picture here, thousands of people waiting to get onto the ship. In Dawson City, there were 35,000 people. It was one of the largest cities in Western Canada in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And it was absolutely fascinating. And there was a Jewish element there as well. And so that's getting to the gold rush. And here in the second panel is life in the Klondike. So some of the stories of what people did. Here's the Barron family, which is a fascinating story. Joseph Barron, there were 3 ways to get to Dawson City. One, you could grab onto a ship in Seattle, Victoria, or Vancouver, and it would come up and it would land up here in Skagway, Alaska. And then you had to bring with you, because the Canadian government said, look, if you're coming here, if you're going to Dawson, it's in the middle of nowhere. You have to bring with you 1 year's supply of product and food to sustain yourself, because there were no grocery stores or anything. And so everyone who came up on the ships had a ton and a half of goods. And they had to stop at Skagway, that was one way. And then they would take a trip over the Chilkoot Pass and come into Carcross. and they would winter in Carcross and build a draft, or some of them maybe would build some other kind of transportation to get onto the Yukon River and go 500 more miles on the Yukon River up to Dawson. And they did it. They did it. Unbelievable that they were able to do such things. Now, there's one really neat story. This one person on here, I think he's right over here where we have a story. Where is Max? Oh, Max Hirschberg of Columbus, Ohio. So Max Hirschberg came up, was in Skagway with his ton and a half of stuff, but when he was coming up to go over the Chilkoot Pass, he, in a landslide, he lost all of his stuff. And so the Jewish community helped him get into Dawson. And then after a couple of years in the January of 1900, Max Hirschberg in this January of 1900, he looked at everyone, he said, there's nothing more for me here. The gold rush is starting to move into Alaska to Nome, 1,300 and some miles away. I'm going to follow the gold rush. I'm leaving. And they smiled and said, sure you are. So when the river melts and the ships come in and they go up, you'll jump on a ship in June, July, and you'll go to Nome, Alaska. And he looked at him and said, no, I'm going to bicycle next week from here on the frozen Yukon River to Nome, Alaska, 1,300 miles away. And although he wasn't able to go right then, it was a few weeks later, he did. He bicycled on the frozen Yukon River. There were dog sled trails that were 2 to 3 inches wide. And that's what he used on his bicycle to go all the way to Nome and the 1,300 miles. And periodically, when he needed help, there were First Nations there to help him out. And about 100 miles outside of Nome, his chain broke. And what did he do? He got a big stick, he put it into the back of his jacket, and he put some stuff on this big thing. He sort of made a T, and he sailed into Nome, Alaska, and he made it. And that's one story that we have on here. The Barron family, Joseph Barron, there was another way to get to the gold rush. And that was almost like he was in Winnipeg to start. And then he basically dog sledded. There was another. So here's the one where you come up from, Victoria, Vancouver, Seattle, and you come to Skagway, and then you go over the mountain. Another way would be to come like this, dog sled, and you would end up basically somewhere around Carcross and then go up to Dawson City. And the third way to get was all by ship, which was much more expensive. But you would grab a stern wheeler, it would come up to the Klondike River and then come down the Klondike River to Dawson City. Those are the 3 ways to get to the gold rush. And it was amazing, the strength of these people. Now, the Jewish group in Dawson, they actually met. They didn't have a Torah, they didn't have any information, but several of them knew Shabbat services by heart. And they would sit down they were mercantile people. And someone had a business, a shop, and they would come and they would sit down in the shop and they would do the Shabbat services. It was really actually amazing. So 35,000 people in Dawson, but up to 1902, when they got the cemetery, people started to leave. We discovered there are 6 people buried in the cemetery. And on in the research, which we'll get to in just a minute, it's mentioned in here who's buried there and why, how they got there. And oh my gosh, and there's several other stories. Max Hirschberg, the Barron family. The Barron family, the 2 children were the first to be matriculated in Dawson in Western Canada. The older son The mother had relatives in Chicago. He went down to Chicago, became a lawyer, got a law degree. His younger son went afterwards to Chicago, became a lawyer. They had an uncle in Calgary. And he said, get your ass up here. We need lawyers in Calgary. And this is around 1910, 1912. And so the two brothers eventually ended up in Calgary, set up the Barron Law Firm, which exists today still. And they built the first high-rise building in Western Canada. And at the time, later on, the oil industry was beginning to come into Calgary, but they had no office space. So the Barron law firm, Barron and Barron, the law firm, the two brothers, contact oil people to come and set up the office in our building. That building just last year was named as a Canadian historical site. And it's so many amazing stories there. And what, oh, there's others, I just can't, oh my God, I've got to tell you this. Down in the bottom here is, I wonder how many people remember Diamond Tooth Lil. Does that ring anyone's bell? Diamond Tooth Lil, if you see these panels, she was Jewish. She was 17 years old. And her actual name, I've got to go back here again because I keep forgetting her actual name. Honora Ornstein. Honora Ornstein was her name. And she was from Butte, Montana. Her parents were very wealthy in Butte, Montana. And she had a diamond here and a couple of other diamonds as well. And Diamond Tooth Lil, she created a very fancy home in Skagway. She was up here in Dawson, then went to Skagway because that's where everyone was staying over. And she had a home. And well, as we read in the story, most of the people who were coming to the Klondike Gold Rush were men. And Diamond Tooth Lil had set up this home to entertain the men, shall we say, that way. So there are lots of really neat stories that happened. Then again, with Brent, so Brent had finished the panels, he had this, and we determined, because there was so much more going on there, that we should probably do a book. And Brent and I started to do some work on the book. We had all this research, but regrettably, Brent passed away suddenly. And it was, you know, it was a shock to me, but it's something that we had to keep doing. And we got funding to do the book and not to print it though. So we got funding from the Yukon government, again, for the third time, to do the research and make the book, which was more academic. And we got funding then from the Yukon 125, which was a program organized by the Yukon Historical Society to print the book. And to tell you more about her research and the writing and producing of the book, I want to introduce Fia Jampolsky. Fia came on side with us and she did the writing for the book, and she'll tell you more about that. So Fia Jampolsky is a lawyer and a tribunal member helping and working with First Nations, and a longstanding member of the Jewish community. She's also a board member of the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. When she can get out from under the details of the law and working in the law, she loves to and tries to find a lot more time in creative writing. She's been published in the Globe and Mail, in What's Up Yukon, and other journals. Fia took over from Brent and is the primary researcher and writer of the book we have just published, The Jewish Presence in the Yukon Before, During, and After the Klondike Gold Rush. And so now, Fia, are you with us?
I am.
All right, there you go. The floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here chatting about this great project. which has been longstanding for everybody who's been in the community for that long. I like to say I was 12 when I came up, but I was actually here when we did the rededication project. And I remember my husband and I had just moved to the Yukon, and we had a big blue pickup truck, and we put the white picket fence for the cemetery in the back of our pickup truck and drove it up to Dawson for someone else to install. So it's been a really meaningful project for a very long time. So I took over the writing of the book. Before we did that, we redid that pamphlet or larger format book that Rick just showed you. We just corrected a few errors in it and added a little bit more. But as Rick said, there was so much great information that it just begged for a larger project. So I spent a couple of years working on that. And as I was saying to a few people before we even started this meeting, I think we still left things on the table. We had some time pressures. And so I think there's room for an even greater project here because it was just really fascinating. So I don't know how many people have had an opportunity to see the book. There's a bibliography at the back that just sort of cites some of the sources that I went to, but found a dearth of information in a number of areas, including websites. Alaska has some good websites about their Jewish community, and a number of the members of the Jewish community from Dawson followed gold rushes onto Alaska and ended up in Alaska. There were historical compilations. I think there might be one from Ottawa that I looked into to get some information. There are newspaper articles that go back to 1899 from Dawson that had references to the Jewish community. The archives up here is an amazing resource with tons of information. And from there, we had already found some of the letters petitioning the government of Canada for the Jewish cemetery starting in 1902 and continuing on till 1913. In the good spirit of government bureaucracy and timeliness, it took over 11 years to complete that project. There are a number of books that talk about the Klondike in general. For a while, it was a hot topic up here, and it talked about a number of different communities in the Klondike. You know, there's always been this sort of stereotypical view of the Klondike, sort of this swashbuckling man who goes up to the Klondike to find gold. And there was a period of time where there was a lot of information and research done that talked about other communities. It was a very multicultural community that was up in the Klondike. There were lots of women who came up to the Klondike who were already there. There was, of course, always a First Nations presence that was much affected, not necessarily in a positive way, by the Klondike. And so finally, there was some research and writing done with respect to that. And there was also a lot of information about companies, which will lead me into the Jewish community in the Klondike, that supported the Klondike in so many ways other than just individuals who are going up to make their fortune. So in my research, I feel like there's a couple of themes that came out in terms of the community that ended up in the Klondike. So I thought I'd just talk about a couple of them tonight. One of them, of course, is the idea of the merchants supporting the gold rush, both from afar, but also from in Dawson. So I just wanted to share a couple of stories of merchants who were involved in the Klondike. One of the ones that I found the most interesting that we hadn't done a lot of research on before was the Alaska Commercial Company. And the Alaska Commercial Company started and found their fortune in the seal industry, but for a number of reasons had to diversify. So Louis Schloss was born in Bavaria, and he was orphaned by the time he was 10. He came over to the United States to follow his brother in about 1845. He was probably about 22 years old, and he settled for a short period of time in Kentucky. But the spirit of adventure and his entrepreneurial spirit took him away, and he crossed the U.S. by horseback in 1849, and he created a textile company called Slauson Company, which grew into this Alaska Commercial Company. He met a number of individuals, including Louis Gersel, and they created the Alaska Commercial Company, which ultimately did a number of things. Once they moved on from sealing, they created the steamboats that Rick was talking about that came into the Yukon. And the steamboat, which was named the Excelsior, is a steamboat that chugged away into San Francisco on July 4th, 1897, and was the boat on which there was about 25 miners and $500,000 worth of gold dust that sparked the gold rush. Overnight, the frenzy started from this boat landing in San Francisco. That boat, the Excelsior, was an Alaska Commercial Company boat. Other merchants that supported the gold rush or gold miners from afar included Cooper and Levy. And Cooper and Levy were a couple of individuals who started a mail order grocery and hardware business in 1892 in Seattle. Like so many, I'm sure, of the people who came up during the gold rush, and even happens today, there's a history in their blood. And the gold rush was in Louis Levy's blood, of Cooper and Levy. His parents owned a gold mine and a general store during the California gold rush. And they lived in Sitka in 1897 when Alaska first became a state. They went back to San Francisco and then ended up in Seattle, where Louis Levy met Isaac Cooper. The picture on the book is the Cooper and Levy storefront in Seattle. They made enormous profits outfitting people for the gold rush, and they sold their business off by 1903. And they sold their business to none other than the Bon Marché, which is the same Bon Marché that many of you may know is one of my favorite places to go in Paris, because they have the best grocery store in the basement. So their beginnings were way before, during the Klondike. There's some great connections, and one of my favorite bits of research that I found was a journal that was kept in the Yukon archives. And it's a journal of a woman named Rebecca Schuldenfrei. And she wrote letters home to her family about her trip up to the Yukon with her husband, Solomon. And there are letters which put her in Seattle, meeting Cooper and Levy and getting outfitted in Seattle before they came up to the Yukon. And Rebecca and Solomon, like so many other people who came up to the Yukon in 1897, had no idea what they were doing. They owned a fairly successful tie business in New York City, and Solomon, like so many other people at that period of time, heard about the Klondike, got the bug and said, "I'm going." And Rebecca said, "You're not going without me." And so together they left their kids with, I think it was with Rebecca's sister, and off they went from New York through Seattle and up to the Klondike. They even tried a route. Rick told you about the three most common routes to the Klondike: through Skagway, through the White Pass, or through the Chilkoot. But there was a couple lesser known ways that people tried to get up, and they're lesser known because they were not great ways to get to the Yukon. So one of them is from Wrangell, Alaska, going up the Stikine River, upriver 230 miles, at which point you end up so far away from Dawson City, I can't even tell you. But this was a route that Rebecca and Solomon Schuldenfrei thought about taking. But fortunately for them, there was so much ice in the river still that they were unable to do it. So they ended up going via the Skagway route, the Chilkoot Pass, and ending up in in Dawson City, where they did not make their fortune. Some made their fortune and some did not. So in addition to businesses like Cooper and Levy, who were outfitting outfitters from afar, there were a number of people that ended up in Dawson City owning stores, clothing stores, textile stores, guns and ammunition stores. One of those people, Rick mentioned, Solomon Packer. His is the only gravestone that we have a clear marker of where he was buried in the cemetery. And Solomon Packer was born in Odessa, Russia. He came to Dawson in about 1897. And as I said, he set up a hardware, guns, and ammunition store on First Ave. Solomon's wife died in 1901, and his children were sent to live with an uncle in Duluth, Minnesota. He's one of the only people that we know who stayed long after the gold rush. He lived in Dawson City for about 20 years after the gold rush. And he finally made plans to leave in 2018. But unfortunately, he died of heart failure weeks before he was going to leave. And again, his is the one marker that is very clear in the cemetery. Other merchants include the Isaac brothers from Chicago. Henry and Charles came up to join the gold rush in 1898. They staked claims and they set up a clothing store, and their brother Abraham joined them shortly after. They employed a number of Jewish employees that we have records of. Some of those employees were implicated in a robbery of the Isaac brothers' warehouse in 1903. And there's some newspaper articles about the charges and the trial. Abraham became secretary of the Hebrew congregation, and he is one of the people that helped petition Ottawa for the use of Lot 16 and 17 to create the Jewish cemetery in 1902. And the third brother, Henry, took himself back to Chicago to find a wife in 1901. Your chances weren't great in Dawson City at that time. And Henry and his new wife, Belle, were featured in the Chicago Daily Tribune because they then dog sledded back to the Yukon when they finally came back. So definitely a theme of entrepreneurial spirit and mercantile industry. Many more stories in the book of that nature. The other interesting theme I found were ties to the movie industry. And I don't know, for history buffs out there, there's an interesting book that came out in 2023 by Michael Gates. I think it's called Hollywood to the Klondike. And it was based on, so there's a greater theme here, not just the Jewish community, but there were a number of silent films that were found partially destroyed and frozen into the permafrost. And I think it was under the hockey rink, and they were doing some excavating and found these films in 1978. So I think this piqued an interest for Michael Gates, and he wrote a book on it. But there's also this great connection to the Jewish community and a number of individuals who were up there. One of the most famous is Sid Grauman, who traveled to the gold rush with his dad. He was about 17 years old, and his father had to leave pretty quickly because of family illness down south. So Sid Grauman was left in the Klondike on his own when he was 17 years old. He proved to be pretty entrepreneurial. One of the stories about Sid is that he consigned 2,000 papers from down south, and he planned to sell them for $1 a piece. He gave the rights to one other individual. He sold the first paper for $25, and that individual then, also in an entrepreneurial spirit, had people gather in an arena. He charged them, read them stories, piqued everyone's interest, and after that, Sid was able to sell off the lot of papers at a great profit to himself. We don't really know when he left or what happened immediately after, but ultimately Sid Grauman and his father opened up a number of theaters, first in San Francisco, and then after the San Francisco earthquake to Los Angeles. Most notably, he opened up the Egyptian Theater, the Chinese Theater, Sid Grauman was responsible for the Charlie Chaplin film about the gold rush, entitled The Gold Rush, which opened in the Egyptian Theater on June 26, 1925. And he is also, this is my favorite, he is responsible for the creation of the Hollywood Squares. So very well known. Another individual named William David Gross didn't quite reach that level of fame, but he ultimately came up, was very entrepreneurial, and set up a movie projector in Dawson. There's been some question as to the nature of the films he was showing early on, but it's never been proven exactly what sort of entertainment he started with. But William David Gross opened theaters all over gold rush cities and a number of Alaskan towns as well. But he had a couple of stories that really showed the business acumen of individuals and a savviness and a desire to survive in the North. He was quite young when he came. He landed in Skagway and worked in Skagway for a while. And there are two great stories about William in Skagway. He bought a vat of rancid butter that had gone bad on the trip up to Skagway, and he resold that butter as axle grease, making money off of something that would otherwise have been ruined. He also, because of course damage occurred on this incredible journey, we're just sort of passing it off, but it was such a journey. And so there was a whole bunch of flour that had been, they thought, destroyed because it was in the boat, and the bottom of the flour sacks all got wet, and so they were caked in flour. So he bought that flour at a completely reduced price, and he just cut it open, resewed the bags, and sold smaller bags full of flour, because all the flour on top of the bags, of course, were just fine. So that's how William Gross got his start and made the money to get him to Dawson City. So those are just a couple of stories of amazing individuals that we found had tried their luck and gone up to the Yukon. Some were successful, some were not. After the gold rush, people like the Shulden Fries, Rebecca went home after a year up there. And although her journals say that they didn't make any money, she certainly said that they had a great time there. Her husband stayed, lost his businesses in a number of fires, and ended up going back broke. Others moved on to gold rush towns, such as the Isaac brothers and Robert Bloom and Isaac Bales, and others made their fortunes and sold them off when they went down. We don't have a lot of information about the Jewish community sort of between the early 1900s to the 1980s. But since this project started, in the last 30 years, the Jewish community, I would say, in the Yukon has really grown and blossomed. A 2021 census puts the population at 230. I think that's probably underestimated. It's hard to say. It's all anecdotal, but there are lots of community events that go on now. Rick has formalized a lot of those community events with the creation of the Yukon Jewish Historical Society, became the Yukon Jewish Cultural Society, because it's ongoing. It's not just about this historical project, but about things happening now. And so Rick is great at hosting events. Rosh Hashanah, often what started as a Wiener roast at a campground has become much bigger than that. There's often Seders and Hanukkah lightings. I was saying just before we started this as well, we have two girls, and so we had two bat mitzvahs in the Yukon, which we only know of one bar mitzvah that occurred, Rick might know better than I, probably about 40 years ago. So we decided this was a great opportunity, one, to give our kids a little bit of Judaism that is otherwise difficult to come by here. So we actually worked with a rabbi, an amazing rabbi in Vancouver. And so I believe that when he came up for my daughter's bat mitzvah in I'm already forgetting the date of when that would have been. He brought up a Torah in a suitcase with him on the plane. He also did a dedication ceremony in the cemetery in Whitehorse. So there are a couple of plots which are designated as Jewish cemetery plots in Whitehorse now. And we had an amazing celebration under June Northern Skies. The second bat mitzvah took place during COVID. So what was supposed to be a bat mitzvah in Israel turned into a Zoom mitzvah here during a period of time where we were allowed to congregate. I think we could have up to 50 people. So we had 30 people on a deck with more people on Zoom, and we ended up rafting down the Takini River the next day. So it had a very northern flavor to it. And I think that's the tale of Judaism in the North, is that there's always a northern flavor to it. We have adapted our own traditions, but they are long-standing. They go back to the gold rush, and they continue to flourish. I know we're starting to run out of time. People may have some questions. I'm always happy to answer questions outside of this. You guys can get my email address, and I'm more than happy to chat with you.
Thank you, Fia. That was wonderful. And there are so many stories. The Sid Grauman story. He actually got an Academy Award in 1949 and passed away in 1950. And we are running short. So we have one last thing to discuss, and that is I want to introduce Nikki Rosenberg. And I want to mention to everyone quite quickly that we have a number of Israelis. There's two right here in the room with me this evening, and Nikki Rosenberg and his daughter are both from Israel. So let me just introduce Nikki, and he'll talk about our website briefly, and then we'll open the floor to questions and answers. Nikki is a senior innovation advisor. He's an experienced mentor, innovator, and entrepreneur. After completing his degree in electrical engineering and computer science, Nikki founded his first business, an IT company operating out of northern Israel that serviced companies both locally in Israel and abroad. He came to Canada in 2013. Now he's an advisor for a federal government agency called ISED, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. And he also teaches classes on innovation, entrepreneurship, and IT at Yukon Strut, a business accelerator program in Whitehorse. On top of all of that, he's also an active member of the Jewish Cultural Society. And because of his background, he volunteered to design and create our website. And so now I'll turn the floor over to Nikki.
Thank you very much. I will try to share my screen. Oh, found it. What's going on here?
Just have to tell.
Can I share the screen? I have to ask for permission.
Maybe just discuss the website.
Okay, I cannot share the screen, so I will just talk about it.
Have you clicked the green button at the bottom that says share screen there?
Yes, and
I need you guys to post.
I don't know how to get rid of your statements, obviously.
okay, it doesn't work, so you will have to look on your computer. So anyway, I don't have to be so close. At some point, Rick spoke so far about the past, the history, and the present. So as a technology guy, I decided to speak about the future. And today, if you don't have a website and an email, you don't exist in the internet world. So we applied for Yukon government, and they helped us to build online presence, which is to have a domain, to have some email at our domain instead of using Rick's personal email, and to create a website. And the website is jcsy.org. You can click it on your computer. And we have a few pages. One of them is about our society and the summary of the other pages. And some of the pages are about our events, and you can see pictures of our Jewish New Year celebration and other celebrations, Passover and other celebrations. We have even a page in Hebrew for people who want to look for us in Hebrew language, and also a page of how to contact us and how to find us on the map. And actually this website contributed to a lot of people traveling to find out that there is a Jewish community, and during their travel to stop by and be hosted by the Jewish community. So I encourage you to go to the website and discover by yourself. And I hope this YouTube video, which we are making now, will be part of the website in the future. Oh. Somebody, no, it's not about the website. So anyway, thank you very much. And if you want to contact us and you don't remember how, go to the website, which somebody just put in the comments. And there is a contact us form, so you can contact us directly and we'll go from there. Thank you very much. And Rick?
Okay, thanks. Okay. Thank you, Nikki. So again, the website, as I think Thea just posted, is jcsy.org. There is so much, we could go on forever. I was just wondering, though, taking it at this time, are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to make, or ask a question for a response?
Yeah, does anybody have any questions? You can put it in the chat or you can speak up.
I have a question. Rick, approximately how many people live in the Yukon today?
In the whole,
In
okay,
the whole area?
I'm glad you asked that. The whole of Yukon is about almost more than a half, almost 2/3 the size of all of Ontario. So it's a very large territory. And in the whole of Yukon right now, there are just under 46,000 people in the whole of Yukon. And in Whitehorse, we're up to just about 37,000 people in Whitehorse. So once you get out of Whitehorse, you're in the middle. The Department of Tourism loves to advertise that there are more bears in Yukon than people. And it's, we get a good laugh of that. And each spring, it's fascinating, but the caribou coming from Alaska come down through northern Yukon and move over into the Northwest Territories. And there are over 200,000 caribou that take that trip. It's absolutely unbelievable. The First Nations, as Fia was mentioning, are also amazing in Yukon now that they have their feet on the ground and they've settled their land claims. So it's a wonderful, wonderful place to be.
And the Jewish community is located predominantly in Whitehorse?
Primarily in Whitehorse, yes. We have 54 members on the JCSY, Jewish Cultural Society of Yukon. And as Fia was saying, there's probably more than 200 and some that are actually in Whitehorse and Yukon.
And do most people participate when you do get together with the Cultural Society?
Well, I think as Fia was saying, when we had the barbecues for Rosh Hashanah, we would have probably 30 or 40 attend. So
That's
we're
marvelous.
pleased with our attendance. And we just had a Hanukkah get together. This was a really weird time, the first day of Hanukkah being Christmas Day. It was a really weird time. We had our Hanukkah get together on December 28th, and we had about 24 people there.
That's
So,
wonderful.
well,
That's
considering
great.
the size of everything, we were pleased with that, yes. And I have to say, the Chabad in Calgary have been extremely supportive and helpful to us. For example, I do send out the weekly Parsha and Haftorah, thanks to the Chabad in Calgary. And to receive that, there are 37 of our members who still want to
Wow.
receive the weekly Parsha and Haftorah.
That's wonderful.
I think we've got a question from Gary Viner.
Hi, Rick. I'm sorry I missed your part of the presentation. We got in a bit late, but I have a oral history from my family that says that my great-grandfather went to the gold rush in the Klondike in around 1900 or so. And I know he was apparently on a Hirsch colony as well. I can't find him there in any of the fawns, but I'm wondering if there's any way of investigating whether he had any presence in the Yukon around 1900. I know he was in Winnipeg by 1904. I have these found in the city directory, but I can't find any sign of whether Herman Halpern was elsewhere.
Oh, interesting. I wonder, as Fia was saying, there was a census in 1902. So if he was still here before he went down south, he might have been mentioned there. If you want to go on our website, jcsy.org, and go to the contact us page and ask that question. Give us as much detail as you have, and then we'll see about doing research.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else with any questions?
Stacy L. Lee Bernard.
What was that?
Did someone speak up?
Hi, I missed the beginning and I was going to ask, Rick, were you related or are you related to any of the Carps from Ottawa? K-A-R-P from Ottawa?
Yes, I was born and raised in Ottawa. You know, Bernard Ben Carp was my father, and Etta, my mother. And then, of course, there were a whole bunch of brothers that my father had. Yes, absolutely. Nap Kopinski, he was an uncle.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Wonderful to know that.
Yeah, it was wonderful growing up there. And of course, Joy, my wife, she was Joy Rudman when we met. And yeah, so it was great. And it's in, as was mentioned earlier, I've just published her biography. She was
It's also on the card.
what was that?
We can't see who's asking the questions, Tegan.
I also can't see who's asking.
Oh, okay.
Does anyone else have a question? Feel free to really speak up.
Rick, what brought you up to the Yukon originally?
Just take care of them.
Oh, well, I'll show you a picture.
Bye-bye.
This, Joy,
I could.
this is Joy's biography. And in 1978, Joy created what became the worldwide training program for McDonald's. And then years later, 1985, Joy had circumstances throughout her life. But in 1985, we were approved to become McDonald's owner operators. And there are all sorts of funny stories about that. But we ultimately accepted the McDonald's, introducing McDonald's to the north and to Whitehorse. And at that time, Whitehorse was 17, that was January 1986 when we opened. And on opening day, the population of Whitehorse was 17,200. And we had more than 10,000 people come through the restaurant in that one day.
Wow.
And that's what brought us to Whitehorse. We were #1 in Canada for 4 months. And we got a letter from Chicago International Headquarters after our first day saying, congratulations on your first week of sales, but it was our first day.
We've got a question from Mark Holzman.
Yes, hi, Rick and Fia. Thank you so much for a really fascinating presentation of a really fascinating history. And we've all heard of the gold rush, but we've never heard of the Jewish connection. But I also want to congratulate you on not just bringing back the history, but continuing to make Jewish history in the Yukon, because that's what you're doing through the work that you're doing now. And I will share just a personal anecdote that our daughter, Sarah Holzman, lives in Iqaluit. And she's been living in Iqaluit for the last 15 years. And she, with a very small handful of other Jewish Iqalumiut, are creating some Jewish history there. And when we were there in early December, you mentioned the northern way of celebrating both the holidays. And we were there in early December for Shabbat dinner at her house, and with some of her Jewish friends and some of her Jewish friends, and one of her good friends who's an Inuk elder, and she brought her kudlik. And so while we lit the Shabbat candles, she lit the kudlik, the oil lamp that was used in the igloos for heating and for cooking. And we shared both of our traditions. And so that's what you guys are doing. And just congratulations, kol hakavod. It's really wonderful to hear your story. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. That's a wonderful story.
Oh, somebody else.
Mark, I was just going to say that we have a Hanukkah party every year. We have had upwards of 100 people at our Hanukkah party, mostly not the Jewish community. And I've been told by all the non-Jews that it's their favorite part of the Christmas season, is the Hanukkah party.
Hey, do we have any other questions? No? Okay. In that case, Maureen, are you on the call? Oh, you just got to unmute yourself, Maureen.
We'll take one while she's doing that.
Here we are. Go ahead, Ricky.
Make sure that we get a copy of the video.
Oh,
video.
absolutely.
Of course.
Wonderful. And then we'll post it on our website.
Perfect. All right, Maureen, take it away.
Hey, Ricky, Thea, and Nick. It's Maureen here with a hoarse voice, Maureen Monson Katz. I've been privileged to be able to thank you. I'm going to put a pitch in if Terry hadn't already. It was COVID when we had our one of our Zoom meetings, and I suggested that you definitely be featured here in Ottawa. Ottawa boy makes good. You are remarkable. And I think it was Alava Shalom at Barry's funeral where we talked, and thus it became a reality. So allow me just to ask or put a few comments out before I do thank you. I wondered if the McDonald's, when you made the hamburgers, was it caribou?
No,
It
it
was
wasn't.
hamburger meat.
It
Like,
wasn't caribou, but I just have to say, you mentioned McDonald's. On our opening day, someone actually came through the drive-through and wanted to pay with a gold nugget. And that's never, I let Toronto know, they've never heard of such a thing.
wow. Well, speaking of gold, that was my first comment. All you three, including the wonderful website, which I look forward to checking, have made a gold and diamond mine up there. You are terrific, and I echo Billy's and other comments that kol hakavod to you three and what you've done, the satisfaction you must have, the feelings of the completion of all what you've accomplished and still to come. And on that note, there are two things I have been authorized on behalf of the board of directors, of which I'm a member. We are delighted to donate to the Yukon the Jewish Yukon Cultural Society $100 to to thank you for your outstanding work. And and on top of that, I think I can speak with authority, having spoken with Terry before. I personally feel this is a Netflix series. I don't know about you, but just to see it on 3 panels and to hear excerpts and to absorb it and to be excited about it, it's definitely a Netflix series out there. And on that, we would like to extend an invitation to you in due course to come to Ottawa so we can listen to you again and bring a lot more people out, and also have you sign books for us, purchase your books, and bring you back to your hometown.
They would do that.
Where you come from. So, but all of you and Ricky, thank you very, very much for a splendid, extraordinary evening. We're so grateful.
And thank you all.
You're here. If I can add one more thing, you made a point of showing us the books that you have published. Is it possible for us to get copies of them? If you just would let Tegan know how much they are, et cetera, et cetera. I think it would be great for us to have them, certainly for the Historical Society, but definitely for the archives, and maybe even the Malka Pass Library at Kehillat Beth Israel. That's one thing. I forgot to ask, what did they call the movie that they made from your book?
Well, the Gone in a Heartbeat. It's a movie about joy.
Oh,
We shouldn't really get too far into that, but in 1992, Joy was kidnapped and buried alive for 17 hours.
oh God.
Buried alive.
Yes, Terry, I didn't tell you
Yeah,
this.
but, we're not here for that, right? If
Okay.
anyone's interested in that, but this book, if anyone who's on this Zoom call would like to get a copy of this book, let Tegan know. We can send a number of books to Tegan, and then she can do a distribution. And it's basically it's $20.
Yeah. No problem. I think it'd be a wonderful addition for everybody to have.
Fia did unbelievable work in this. I'm telling you, some of the stories are just out of this world. They're
Eric and Donna are on.
amazing.
Rick, do you mind just saying the title of the book? Someone's asking in the chat.
The title of the book is The Jewish Presence in the Yukon Before, During, and After the Klondike Gold Rush. And this is and on the back, see, that's the cemetery. Yeah. And the Beit Chaim. Oh, there's so many stories in here. It's just, it's hard to believe. And the Max Hirschberg riding his bicycle across about 1,300 miles Fia, it's here. It's right here. This is what Max Hirschberg wrote.
Rick, it's Eric here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. This is 2019. Is this a different book?
Yes.
Yes,
This is the first one.
Yes, this was the book that you have, Eric, that traveled with the 3 panels. And there are a lot of stories in there, but it's primarily finding the cemetery.
Tegan, we don't know each other. Hello to all my friends out there. I think you should find all of the things that Rick has made, because
Definitely.
I think a lot of people in Ottawa would be very interested in them.
I think so. I'll contact them and see what we can do about getting them available for everybody.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay.
Fantastic evening. Thank you so much.
If you have any questions, you go to our website.
Not to me, it was a website.
jcsy.org. You've got to visit it anyway. You'll see pictures and all sorts of really neat things. Okay?
Thank you.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you so much, Rick,
Thank
and
you.
thank you everybody
Thank
for
you very
showing
much.
up. Everyone
Okay.
have a great evening.